Mm-mm. Wow, there's such a lag on like information with people. I feel like it's like people are. I don't know if it's just new people to the chat. They just kind of come in and just kind of like you still like feels like people are just getting up on things weeks after this stuff happened, months, years, even maybe. Um, and then people like say, "Yeah, I don't know about. I don't have Facebook," which is funny. I don't have it. Like I've never really had it. Like there's a Lupe Facebook page, but it's more like a just like a profile for promotion. It's not like a personal thing that I get into. I don't even know how to get in it. I don't even know how to use it. But I've never used like Facebook. So I don't I'm disconnected from if that's the source of where people are getting their kind of content from. I know they're getting it from YouTube for sure. But YouTube is different because YouTube is a balanced. Like you really got to search. You really got to go down like a rabbit hole to find to get into the bullshit that's on YouTube. But it just seems like people come with these very like these like very scheduled gaps, which I don't know how to I don't know where they're getting it from because I don't know, maybe I'm not following the same people they're following on social media, the gram, and maybe it's coming from that. But it's just so it's like between Twitter, Facebook, IG, YouTube, and just in terms of social media, not message boards. It seem like those are like creating this really weird quadril quadril quadrecta, which is like just giving people all kinds of horse shit. Or if it's not like horse shit, it's just like really bad, decontextualized information chunks that people just kind of like run with. And I don't know if because because it's coming from an official source or it's not coming from a book. Maybe they think books are like very much so just frozen in place and they can't be updated. Or there's something about I guess the presentation on it, but like a lot of shit be wrong, man. You know, or either wrong or underdeveloped, or people people focus on the wrong aspects of it, and then they just go down like this rabbit hole on it. It's so weird. Um, and it just makes me wonder like where y'all getting your information from. Um, Fan of Hawaiian food? Yes. I like Mocha Loco. Mocha Loco is really good. Delish. And I also like ain't too much. I mean, I could do like just the lunch plates and stuff like that. I can't eat like, of course, the Kahlua pig and all that stuff, and the musubi, the spam sushi joints. I can't eat those, but I can dabble in the rest. So Hawaiian food is rather good. Musubi, I think it's called spam musubi. The manipulation of people has been mastered. Where should we get our news? Here's the thing about news. Kid. Let me fill you in. You never ask the question, why do you need the news? You ever ask yourself that question? No, you never ask yourself that shit. You always just accepted it because you were born into it. Anything that you're born into, you're not really going to question until later. But by the time you're able to even question what's going on, it's already a part of your existence. So because we think news is important, overall, regardless of what good news, bad news, whatever the news is, there's this, and if you like, well, it's not mainstream news, then it's Facebook news, or it's, message board news. Like for some reason, we feel, because we're nosy, that the news is important. Like, but it becomes like it's important maybe for a specific group of people for a very specific period of time, for a very specific goal. And beyond that, everything else is just irrelevant to your life. And it might be that you watch, like you can sit and watch, like say Democracy Now!, right? Which is what I watch just for like global headlines, right? But watching Democracy Now! Is somewhat relevant to me because I have businesses in other countries and I actually travel around. And I have kind of like a product that you want to push into different places. So you want to have an understanding, or at least a temperament, understanding of the temperament of a specific place in real time, not just its history, but like what's going on now. So if I ever tour over here, if I ever get an offer to go over here, I go for it. Right? So it's a little different when I'm watching world news. So there's a certain level of relevancy because I have direct business in some of these places. Now, on the other side of that, there's all of the rest of it has no. It's like the degrees of separation are like super far away from me. Like I'm not going to. This doesn't affect me. That doesn't affect me. That doesn't affect me. That doesn't affect me. But you sit and you watch, maybe, let's say, 30%, maybe for me, it's probably like maybe 15% of the news that I watch is relevant to me directly. The rest is not. The rest is like super far away. And I think there's something too, like, what are you using the news for? And you give it somewhat of an importance above and beyond what is actually its utility and its use to you. And what is some of the side effects of consuming all of that information, and the majority of it you're not going to use, right? So I think the news is very complicated, and it's a very sophisticated thing, which you need to kind of be on guard, or at least have a certain intentionality going into it. But we've been trained to just accept it and just be immersed in it without any real kind of critical or analytic pre-game before we go in. And, for some people, I think it fucks them up. And then the flip is all of the, because at one point there was like, I mean, there's always, and the funky part is there's always been news in some way or another. It's just how we access it. So there's always been newspapers. There's always been, whenever there was a medium invented, it always had a news element to it. Movies had news reels, radio had news broadcasts, blah 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 blah. Magazines, etc. etc. The Wire, people used to do telegraphs. That would be like kind of more of an instant kind of news. I think Western Union used to do the news too, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it becomes like, what are you using the news for? What is the value in it for you? And is the news as important as people make it seem to be? Or is literature more important than the news? Like is the idea of this kind of real-time, consistent flow, updated news or updated information or updated narratives, is there more value in kind of static things like books and maybe even movies, or documentaries? Is there more value in just kind of being able to focus on one thing to a deeper, wider extent, and when you get more value out of that versus the news, which comes in like these episodic chunks, whether they're relevant to you or not, So I don't know. It's just an interesting thing. There's been studies. I'm sure there's been studies on the news, the effect of the news, how the news plays out, how we consume the news, how the news how we interact with the news, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what that does to our concepts, points of views, cognition, states of mind, blah, 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 blah. So, and you say facts. So that's the piece. So what are you using the news for? Because it say, well, maybe it's the facts about how do you get to the facts. Like, what are you using the news for? Like, what does it mean to you? Like, what are you supposed to be doing with it? Finding out where to go, finding out what to think. Are you invested in the stock market? So you're watching the news to know when you can pull your money out or put money in. Like, what are you using? And if that's the case, just like everything else, this is just superficial. So you take something like so say that is what you're doing, right? Say like you have money in the stock market, or you're pretending to have money in the stock market, and you got a Robinhood or some type of account or whatever, and you're watching the news. Say you're watching CNBC. So you're not going to watch CNN, right? Because CNN, just raw CNN, doesn't have enough information to inform your stock purchases, right? So you might watch CNN Business or CNN Money, right? Which has a deeper, more concentrated focus specifically on the financial markets, right? But it's also interspliced with all of this kind of peripheral, they might do a story on one company which you're not even invested in, right? but you're maybe watching it for the ticker or some other things, other aspects of the financial markets. But it's still not, it's still probably not enough to inform you on your decisions, right? It's more so just, again, just a more focused presentation of the totality of the markets, right? So you got currency markets and commodities markets and fucking T-bills and all kind of other shit, right? Bond markets. But it's still not enough. And it doesn't really represent the companies that you're in. You might be in penny stocks and they're not even talking about fucking penny stocks, right? So the next layer to that would be something like if you, so say if you wanted to go like really focused in, right? Maybe you say, okay, I'm gonna watch CNN Money, I'm gonna watch Bloomberg, right? I'm gonna do Bloomberg Financial. And maybe Bloomberg has a deeper kind of penetration into the markets, right? And is giving you information that might affect market wide type situations, right? But still, it's not deep enough because it has to serve all these different masters, right? It has to be entertaining. It has to be immersive. It has to blah, 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 blah. So you say, all right, this shit isn't enough to inform me. Maybe Bloomberg Financial will help me inform my choices. So you but I want something even deeper, right? You want to be using what the market is actually using, the traders are actually using. So you get like Bloomberg Terminal, right? You'll spend $1,000 a month or whatever it is and subscribe to Bloomberg Terminal. And Bloomberg Terminal is the news, right? Basically, it's the news. You can't trade on there, right? It's not like a trading platform from what I understand. It's just pure information. But the amount of detail of information is so precise and so layered. And so the attention to detail is like literally just like pinpoint accuracy that you use Bloomberg Terminal as your information source to inform your stock market positions or what you're planning on buying or what you're planning on selling in a very serious, dedicated, professional way. So there are things that exist in the world that provide information very specifically, up to the minute, detail by detail by detail by detail, right? For example, to make sense for people, that analogy might have been a little too deep. But take the difference between, like, say you're interested in the police and you're interested in crime, right? And you have two choices. You can either watch, say, your local television station, your local news station, right? Most locals don't have a 24-hour news cycle, right? But let's say you watch your local news, or you can get a police scanner, right? Which one are you going to get? If you only could get one, right? Which one do you feel, if you're really interested in crime, you're really interested in real-time things, which one are you going to get, right? Are you going to get the news or the police scanner? Police scanner is going to be the raw, unfiltered, every call that's coming in, every code, da-da-da-da-da. With the police scanner, you got to be a little more sophisticated. You got to kind of know what the codes are. You got to know how to get through the different frequencies, right? You got to have a certain basic understanding of what's happening and be able to kind of take that data, that raw data, and inform some type of visual for it that's acceptable to you. The news is going to take some of that information and put it in a more palatable form for the mainstream, right? And visualize it in ways that are universal to everyone, but may not be specific enough to give you the accurate information that you need on the side, on your investigations or whatever you think about doing crime. So in every capacity of the world, right? In every field or project or every, whatever your interests are, there are levels to what it is, right? So if you're interested in earthquakes, like, you could either wait on the news to talk about an earthquake, or you can go to the National Geologic Surface website or all of the websites that are dedicated to specifically tracking, earthquakes and seismograph activity and all around the world. And you can just do that, but it's the raw data. You got to kind of have a certain level of expertise to analyze, access, and visualize that data, even though they do visualizations, if I'm not mistaken. But it's levels to the game, right? It's levels to whatever you want to do, and it just depends on how deep you're trying to go. But also, you gotta be careful that what you think is deep because you watched a documentary on YouTube, or you follow this one person on Twitter, they may not, or you get this, you're in this group on Facebook, you still might be playing around at the surface of these issues. Just kind of the general terms are being used. There's not really a deep dive into, it gets real when you start to see math, right? Like when you start to see math and coding and statistics and charts and shit, that's when shit starts to get a little bit realer than if you just got like, here's this picture of these two criminals side by side, and here's this blurb of this story. Like you're seeing visualizations of data when you should be focused on, if you should be focused on the data, not the visualization of the data. Because the visualization could have biases and all type of other stuff in it, the inability to project all of the context, and then you'll get spunt off into the horse shit, So there's levels to it, and I think that the news is just the most top layer of it. And then if you're really interested in the facts, right, you have to be operating at like Bloomberg terminal level, if you're really interested. If you're just kind of casually interested, or you're just tangentially interested, or just, trying to be, I don't know, on code, I guess, then this is enough. You got enough of the buzzwords, who died, who the enemy is, at least in general, and you kind of know what people want to do, right? But beyond that, that might not be enough to win a court case, right? So say if you were, say Breonna Taylor's lawyer, right? Do you think, and only access that you had to the case was signs at protests and Instagram posts and the news, right? Like CNN. That was the only place that you could get your information from. Do you think you'd be able to go in and win that case? Right? Probably not. You would need access to the police reports and body cam footage and all the internal investigations and all of the nooks and crannies of the case. You would have to know who she is, her biography, the biography of the police officers. Like you would have to have access to a treasure trove of kind of information that's, some of it's just all about the mundane details. Would you have a better chance of winning that case? For sure. The more granular, the better. But that takes a lot of time, right? A lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of just kind of like skill to be able to look at that data, see what the data is saying, see what the reports, are they conflicting each other? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? Getting an understanding of the intentionalities and the politics of the prosecutor and that side of the fence, and having a real full-blooded understanding of the totality of the case versus just hashtag XYZ, I don't have all the answers, but I got a bunch of them bitches. A whole lot of them. News on the dark web. I mean, that's kind of oxymoron. News on the dark web is meant to be anonymous. So the news isn't, like, how do you get news from an anonymous source? Like that in itself is problematic. Because you can't verify their source material. It's just kind of strange. But, I mean, it's possible. There's people there's these things called filters that the U.S. military uses, that different departments use. They're basically like maybe a step behind the spokesperson. And what they do is I won't say all of it. I don't know the deep extent of the full role. their full role, their full business role, or whatever they do fully. But one of their roles is they are responsible for what comes out of the battlefield and gets to the press, or gets put in briefs or whatever the situation is. So they're filters. So they filter. They see a lot of, almost, I won't say everything, but they're the ones that are the go-between what happens in the military and what the society is privy to about the military. And so they see all kinds of shit. And they're kind of like gatekeepers. And it's basically people with security clearances and shit like that. And they get access to all of this shit, and they kind of make the decisions on what to do and what should be secret, what should be let to the public, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes those folks, I mean, they could be secret whistleblowers, or they could be leaking documents to WikiLeaks and all kinds of other little shit, But it all depends on what they're trying to accomplish. If they feel like there's a genuine safety issue for the world, they might look at it as their duty to kind of expose that, to bring some attention to it, to get people to stop it, right? But in some cases, it might be, they're gung-ho for the cause, they don't tell you shit. And then there's also a lot of the dark web has already been infiltrated, like a lot of the dark web, from what I understand, like all the Tor sites and all that shit, a lot of that shit is already infiltrated by like the police and law enforcement. And the government. It's like, why wouldn't they? They invented the internet. Why wouldn't they have total access to it? So a lot of people tell you there's anything you do online can be tracked in some way. If you have if you have the right team and the right people hunting it down, you better figure all that shit out. So just because it's on the dark web doesn't mean that it's valid in terms of the information that's there, right? They'll still find you if they really, really wanted to. They'd find that ass for sure. Yeah, I've been on the dark web before, for sure. The media is properly controlling the population. I don't think so. You got to understand something. The media doesn't generate any value, right? In the sense of actual tangible monetary value. They don't generate anything in and of themselves. Information is worthless at the end of the day. What gives it value is, are you able to monetize that information via some type of subscription model or through some type of ad model, where companies will pay you to put their products next to your information. But the information in itself doesn't really have a real value. So the CNN is only as valuable as Apple or whatever insurance company or law firm or whoever's promoting on their channel. But in and of itself, if you want to value the assets and that, but it's really just a promotional vehicle, and most promotional vehicles in and of themselves, are worthless in terms of what they generate beyond their hard asset aspect. Like if you want to pay for a computer at CNN, or how much is the chair worth, but the majority of that shit is a certain level of being valueless. CNN gets paid via the political process. So that's why they're in it, because those commercials that people run, they have to pay CNN to run it. So CNN is in a weird spot, and Fox News and any other news channel, Democracy Now, like all these things have to get funding. And whether that funding is private, whether that funding comes from, donations or Patreons, whatever, news is still at the mercy of its patrons, whether those patrons are corporate or not. You take a place like CNN. CNN is heavily active. Fox News is heavily active in politics because a lot of the money that's generated from the politics they have to promote, right? So the commercial promotion, eliminating robocalls and knocking on doors and posters and shit like that. But when it comes to digital or like regular terrestrial television commercials, I mean, they have to pay that news station to play that shit, right? So they're in it. They have a certain horse in the race when it comes to the politics because they know they're gonna get a windfall of money and dollars. A lot of that money that the politicians raise will get dumped into the media space, and so they're gonna win hand over fist. In addition to all their kind of corporate shit. Now they have an agenda for sure, but do they control the population with that agenda? I mean, at a certain point, the agenda that they have has to be relative to the agendas that already exist in the world, and they're just tapping into it. I don't see the news generating anything, right? I see them kind of they might generate opinion about something, but again, that's a tertiary, secondary. It's not primary. They're not the primary generator of that story. That they're just something happened, and then they're sending people to go tell us what happened about it, and then they get people on staff to talk about that, right? But they didn't generate the initial event. So that's not only a car crash, but also ideas, concepts, social conditions, social patterns, blah, 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 blah. That shit's already there. Their goal is to capture it, package it, and then reprocess it to you and expand it, right? Because it's like just imagine if you had a news station for just your house, right? Like just your house. It was a news station completely focused on just your